Setbacks are temporary, but comebacks, they are legendary. Welcome back to the PSI Effect, where we pause, shift, and ignite purpose that speaks louder than your past. This is Neug, and together with Franky, we're your hosts in this space, and your comeback starts now. Well, welcome back to the PSI Effect Podcast, everybody. Happy to see you here again with us, with myself and Franky, your host in this space. And we are early into 2026, and we're going to talk some more today about habits. But before we get into that, we just want to let you know what's going on in our world. So, Franky, what's happening with you today there, brother?
Lots of running around with the kids. You know, both of them are active in sports. So just been, like I say, like we talked about in previous episodes, and I'm not going to say I have to, do all this running. I get to do all this running around with them and enjoying them playing sports. My oldest son, it's his senior year. So for him, it's this getting to see him kind of go through the last times he'll do certain things as a high school athlete. And for my youngest, who is in middle school, the first time he's doing things in sport representing his school. So it's quite an interesting juxtaposition of those two, but definitely keeps us busy, keeps us running. But it's been great. Been watching some good basketball with them. Watching some good football on TV. I can't help but notice there, Neug, you rocking the old Detroit Lions headgear. Talk to me about that.
Well, I've been a Lions fan forever, actually. So, grew up in the Detroit area, and I've been a Lions fan. So today I just wanted to kind of pay homage to the Lions. This is yet another year that we are waiting until next year. And, I was thinking about it the other day that I have actually been rooting for the Lions and hopeful that they will make it to the Super Bowl for over a half century. I'm still hopeful, Franky. And so, I wanted to kind of pay tribute to them because they are my team. They had a pretty good year last year, and this year, the expectation was high, and they just didn't get there. We can talk about the injuries for the team and so forth and so on, and all the different things, right? Losing our offensive coordinator who went on to Chicago, who's doing actually great things. So that's kind of disappointing. But, nothing against Ben Johnson. He's a great coach. But so, just wanted to pay tribute to my team. Been a fan for a lot of years, not a fair weather fan. And as you know, you know sports. You know how the team has struggled over the years, even though we've had good coaches and good players through the years. It's just been a struggle. But next year, man, next year's our year. I've been saying it for a long time. Next year's our year.
Careful now. You're going to start sounding like those Cowboy fans out there. Watch out.
Oh, God, no. Say it ain't so. Say it ain't so.
Well, man, yeah. But I can imagine it's been tough to be a Detroit fan at times because, there's some greats that have come through that squad, Barry Sanders, and you think about Megatron and folks like that have come through but really didn't get to take it to the big game. But yeah, I feel, and I can honor your commitment to the team, and think it's a good segue to our previous discussion about habits. You're definitely getting in the reps. If you've been pulling for them for over 50 years, you're definitely getting in the reps to where those neural pathways that create habits for us. That's for sure.
Absolutely, man. I will say that even through the years, there's been some bad habits that have surfaced. Language through the games has been a little colorful, but fortunately, not a lot of people get to witness that part of it. But so definitely the habit is there, sir.
Yeah, good. And so hold that thought, because I think it might be good for us to come back to that a little bit later in the conversation about some of these habits that may have developed as a result of your Detroit Lions fandom. But, like you mentioned, we're going to dive back into habits. And for our listeners, if you haven't listened to episode 19, where we talk about harnessing habits, it might be a good idea to just go back and take a listen to that really quickly. We're not going to rehash everything from that episode, but we are going to build upon it in today's conversation as we get into the notion of actually shaping our habits. So our last episode, we were focused on really understanding what habits are, why our brain does that process of making habits and how they work. And today we want to kind of shift gears to talk about how we can proactively shape our habits to help us, make those comebacks to get to where we want to be, to deliver change in our lives. So, Nuge, we talked about two particular books last time: the Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg and Atomic Habits by James Clear. And that's really what sparked our conversation last time, where they dove into habits. And what was the key thing that was required for habit formation that we talked about last time?
Well, we talked about habits being, routine behavior, right? Something that you do on a regular basis. And so that is really the main part of a habit, is something that you do continually and oftentimes automatically without even thinking about it. It's
Right.
just something that you do repeatedly, and if you do it enough times, then it becomes a habit. So that's the main thing, is just a consistent execution of a behavior that you do over and over.
Yep. Repetition is definitely the key. And I like how you really brought it home with that automated sort of context to your response, is because our brain actually does this. Habit formation is a defense mechanism for our brains, or an efficiency gain mechanism for our brains, because when we form habits, it actually allows our brain to take shortcuts. And that's what it really, that's the function of a habit, is to create shortcuts for our brains so that they can operate more efficiently. And that's how we kind of see this automated behavior. And that's why sometimes it can be really hard for us to uh, manipulate our habits.
Well, speaking of manipulating habits and shortcutting, you think that somehow I can get a shortcut for the Lions to make it to the Super Bowl?
Only if you can get them NFL to increase the salary cap, and you hit the Powerball lottery to help them out there.
I'm sorry, I had to throw that in there. That old short circuit. That was I could not resist that.
Well played,
Uh,
sir. Well played.
so anyway, so we were talking about habits, and we talked a little bit about the types of habits, or we talked about good and bad habits versus positive or negative habits in the last episode. And Frankie, I think that you actually summarized that piece quite succinctly, and maybe you want to just give a quick overview of that, and then we can move on in.
Sure. I mean, what I was talking about last time was that I think it's a bit of a misnomer to try to classify a habit as good or bad. A habit is a shortcut for our brains. And if it creates that shortcut successfully, then it's doing what it's supposed to do. But what it really boils down to is, in terms of our long-term objectives or for our betterment, is a habit working for us, or is it working against us? And that's kind of where we got into the conversation, where we gave our listeners the challenge of doing a habit inventory. We asked the listeners, and we said we were going to do it ourselves too, to list out, just sit back and think about it, list out your habits on a piece of paper, things that you do habitually based off of the definitions that we agreed upon in the last conversation. And then after you make your list, go through it and put a plus beside a habit that you thought works for you, and a minus beside a habit that you think works against you. And that list actually is going to come in handy as we consider our conversation today.
Yeah, good stuff. And on that list, one of the things we talked about was how there may be things on that list that you didn't even realize that you do, because things are so automatic.
Right.
And I know that was true for me, as I sat and thought about some of the things that I do on a regular basis without even thinking about it. And honestly, not even considering previously that it was actually a habit. This is something that I do, right? And so, since we've been in this conversation about forming habits, it gave me something to think about in my own daily activities of what things are habitual for me. And so we talked a little bit about it last episode because I brought up about cooking and how when I complete a meal, by the time I'm finished preparing that meal, all of my cooking utensils, my pots and pans and so forth are all cleaned up and put away when I get to the end. And I never really thought about that as necessarily a habit. It's just something that I did when I prepare a meal. So those kinds of things can be, um, you know, uh, unrecognizable as a habit, yet there it is right in front of you.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that's why we mentioned it's important to enlist the help of an accountability partner, trusted friend or loved one that you know is going to be honest with you, because they may help us unearth those habits that we have that are so automatic that they're invisible to us.
Yeah, and the other thing I think I realized too, Frankie, is that nowadays, I don't leave the house to go to work. I just, I do things at home. And so some of the habits that I think I previously engaged in, I no longer have because a lot of the tasks that I did previously, I no longer do. And
Hmm.
so some of those habits kind of fade as time goes on or as life changes and situation change. Again, they can be things that you don't even recognize. They can just, you can just chalk them up to things that you just don't do anymore. But indeed, they were habits. For instance, I always got up. I was always up at, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning without fail. No alarm clock. I was up.
Hmm.
Well, now that I don't have to get up that early, I think I'm still up early. I'm usually up between 6 and 7, but I was consistently up like 4 o'clock, 4:30 in the morning every day without fail.
So that's interesting because there's a very definitive reason why you've noticed those habit changes. And I think the latter half of our conversation, we're really going to get into that. So, we talked about how the repetitive nature of an activity is how the habit forms. And it's interesting because once a habit is formed, when that habit fires, it fires in this kind of repetitive loop type of structure. And I think it's important for us to understand this habit loop and the pieces of that loop and how a habit is actually firing for us. And I think this will shed some light on the observation you made. Now that you're not having to get up and leave the house for work every day, your habits have changed. Well, that's because some of the pieces of your habit loop are now different. So, the habit loop was something that was talked about in Atomic Habits by James Clear. And he talked about it as the four main phases of habit execution. And every habit that we have, whether it's a habit that works for us or a habit that works against us, flows through this loop cycle. And there are four stages. There's the cue, there's the craving, there's a response, and there's a reward. Those are the cycles of the four steps of the habit loop: cue, craving, response, and reward.
So what puts me into the cue stage? If it's something that I intend to create as a habit, it might make more sense. But in my case, where things have changed just because of lifestyle changes, like what cues would you say might have fallen off to where that habit is no longer part of my everyday?
So the cue part of the habit loop, that's really the trigger. That is some sort of external signal or stimulus that lets you know uh, something is about to happen. It's kind of the like, oh, when this happens, something else is about to happen as a result of it. So the cue is the trigger, the stimulation. So in your case, where you were talking about, getting up early, your cue could have been like, I know I have to get to work on time. I have to get up early so I can be at work on time. That was your cue. That was the trigger that
Hmm.
sparked your activity. So the cue is what initiates this whole habit cycle. So, and for me, one of the things that I've talked about, and, we both have this habit of wanting coffee, fixing a cup of coffee first thing in the morning. So for me, the cue is as soon as I get out of bed, I walk into the kitchen. And walking into the kitchen first thing in the morning is the cue that triggers my habit cycle or my habit loop for wanting that cup of coffee in the morning.
Makes sense. And so then, if I jump into the craving, based on your description of the cue, which was spot on, by the way, I knew I had to get to work on time. But also, the craving is part of the motivation or the desire of the specific outcome, right? Or the reward.
Correct.
And so part of me getting to work on time in my particular situation was I don't really like traffic. I don't like heavy traffic. I don't mind
Hmm.
driving. In fact, I love to drive, but stop and go traffic just really annoys me. And so I do what I can to avoid that type of situation. And so I would leave earlier than some people might leave to go to work. And then also, the other part of that um, motivation was to find decent parking because parking was at a premium where I was working. And so
Ah.
um, it would become a challenge the later in the morning that you would try to get to work. And so, that craving for me was avoiding the traffic and also to find a decent parking location. I still had to walk to get to where I
Hmm.
needed to be, but I didn't have to walk, 2 miles. Maybe I only had to walk a mile. So I'll use that analogy. It really wasn't that far though.
But you had to walk a mile uphill, backwards in the snow, both
Uphill,
ways,
backwards, in the snow. That's right.
barefoot.
Barefoot.
But that's a tremendous example, though. The cue was you knew you had to get to work. So that was
Mhm,
the trigger that got you up early. And then your craving was for a nice commute and a great parking spot. So
mhm.
that's awesome. Back to my example of the coffee. Yes, the cue for me was walking into the kitchen and seeing my coffee maker. And then the craving, that high octane caffeinated warm goodness of that coffee cup. That's the craving. It's like, all right, I need to get moving. I need to, get my blood pumping. I need to get my wits about me so I can get about my day. That craving for that caffeine, for lack of a better description, that's what it is. A craving for that caffeine motivated me to have my response, which is the next step in the loop. So we got cue, we got a craving, and then the response. And the response is really, it's what we do, the action that we take because of the cue. And it's the action that we take to get the desired reward, to speak. So my response is I go over to my coffee maker. I have a Keurig single cup coffee maker. I put in that little K cup and I press the brew button. So that is my response to that craving that was initiated by the cue of me walking into the kitchen.
And then, of course, your reward was that caffeine high that you mentioned earlier.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I don't know. It's like, you know, it's like the opposite effect of kryptonite on Superman. That made him all weak and decrepit. I get that cup of coffee. I think the S on my chest gets emboldened and I feel like I could run laps around the house before I head out the door for work. But yeah, the reward is that warming sensation of coffee, getting that jolt of the caffeine and kind of a jump start to get me moving on my way throughout the day.
And the reward for me was just avoiding that traffic. And also, I always had the feeling that if I got to work early, it helped me have a better day versus coming in later and kind of being behind the eight ball because things had already started to happen. My reward was to start the day and give myself an opportunity or what I thought would be, positioning for having a good day. So that was my reward.
Yeah. And this every habit that we have, good and bad, good for us and against us, it follows this habit loop. Cue, craving, response, reward. And our previous conversation, our previous episode, we talked about the structure of a habit and how they're formed through repetition. And now we've just revealed this habit loop, and this habit loop is really like the secret sauce to understanding how to manipulate habits. So knowing that habits operate in this loop of cue, craving, response, reward, we can take specific actions to either create new habits or break existing habits by manipulating things in our environment or our activities around these four parts of the habit loop. So I think it'd be good for us to just kind of talk through what it would look like. So let's say we we want to create a brand new habit. We want to start doing something new. We're still fresh into the new year. People may still be trying to figure out how they want to go about jumping into their resolutions and starting their new habits. So let's say we want to create a new habit. We can break that process down into the 4 parts of the habit loop to give ourselves a leg up on our competition, so to speak.
So let's do this. Let's use for an example. Let's say, because I can imagine there are many people who want to start a new habit. Maybe they want to learn some different things in their profession, in their life, or what have you, and they decide that they need to do some studying, some reading, or what have you. And so maybe the resolution is I want to read more. So let's use that as an example. Let's walk through the steps
Okay.
for somebody who wants to read more and what we can do or what they can do, how we can help them, I guess, to develop this habit of reading more and satisfy that 2026 New Year's resolution for reading more.
All right. So I want to read more. I want to create a habit for reading. So the first thing that we have to do is look at the cue. We have to create some sort of cue, a trigger or stimulus that kind of initiates the loop. And to set ourselves up for success, if we want to create this new habit, we have to do things that make the cue more visible. The more visible our cue, the more explicit the stimulus that kicks off this habit loop, the more likely it is that we're going to take the loop through its full cycle of execution. So
So
in
what you're
this
saying
case,
is I have to have a book.
yes, you have to have a book or some sort of e-reader device. You know, I'm kind of old fashioned. I still like turning pages in a paper book. I'm not a big, digital reader myself, but I still like having a physical book that I can make notes in the margin and all that other good stuff. So yes, we have to have a book, and we likely want to have it somewhere where it's easily accessible and highly visible. So for our cue, we have to make it visible. We have to make it obvious. So instead of having the book in the drawer in my nightstand, maybe I have the book on beside the sink so that when I go to brush my teeth at night, I have the book sitting right there right beside the sink. So as soon as I'm done brushing my teeth, I see the book right there and I grab it and I read before bed. If reading before bed is what I want to do. Or go ahead.
I was just going to say, so what about somebody like me? Like I don't do a whole lot of reading in bed because I fall asleep when I read.
Okay.
I got to have a totally different environment if I'm going to read. Bed is not the place for me to
Sure.
read. So what about somebody like me? What kinds of things might I want to do to create this habit of reading?
So think about the things that you do during the course of your day that are pretty much a given that you're going to do. Your daily routine, places you're going to be in your house, things that you're going to do in your house, and try to couple this cue with some of those things that you're going to do throughout the day. So you've already talked about in previous episodes how you, like me, you like to have that cup of coffee first thing in the morning. So if you want to have some time to read in the morning, you have your book sitting beside the coffee maker. So as you put your coffee on the brew, you have that book sitting right there so you can go sit down with your coffee and your book and get your reading in.
Perfect. I like that a lot, and I think I might try that myself because I don't have the book sitting at the coffee maker, but I think that's a good cue to improve my own reading habits. So let's talk about craving. So what kind of craving must or how does this new habit of reading more fit into the craving?
So it's one of those things where we have to make it attractive. We have to make this craving an attractive thing. So the cue we want to make obvious. The craving we want it to be something that's desirable. So we have to have a mindset that says, all right, well, I'm going to read because I'm going to read a chapter because at the end of the chapter, I'm going to put a dollar bill as my end marker. So I get to reclaim that dollar bill once I've read a certain amount. That's one way to create a craving and make it more desirable. Or once I've read for 20 minutes, I get to go outside and go for a walk, or something that will make the action more desirable for you, so that you want to expend the energy of going through and doing this reading.
Very good. Back in the day, one of the things that I used to do with when I was in school and studying, textbooks, let's just face it, some textbooks are just boring, man. They're just boring. And I always had to have something fun to read alongside with my textbook, because it was just hard sometimes for me to get through some of the text or some of the school books. So I would have something fun. And so I would reward myself by reading something fun after reading or studying my textbook.
I
And
got you.
so, part of my craving was I wanted to read that fun book.
Hmm.
And so I would use that as a mechanism to help me get through some of the boring textbooks that I had to read. Not that, I didn't learn anything from them, but that they just weren't as much fun as some of the novels that I like to read.
Yeah, I get it. Especially chemistry textbooks and physics textbooks are definitely dry reading. So I can identify with that for sure.
Yeah. So yeah, Frankie. So now we talked about cue, we've talked about craving, and we're on this journey to read more. What about the response? How does the response help us, or how does that play into forming this new habit of reading more?
So if we want to form the new habit, we should endeavor to make the response, the action that we take, we need to make it as easy as possible. That's really what it boils down to. We want the response to be something that is super easy, doesn't take very low bar for entry, doesn't take a whole lot of effort on our part. We want to facilitate that response. So in the case of being a reader, again, that kind of goes back to the cue, just having the book readily available, so we don't have to go hunt it down and fish it out from somewhere to do the reading, makes it easier for us to read. Choosing books that are interesting to us is also another way to make it a little bit easier for us to dive into reading that book and making the response easier.
So in other words, if it's something that I want to learn, something I if there's a practice I want to improve upon, then that book could be what really helps me want to read, because it's something that I really want to do. It's something very interesting to me, that would make me want to read, because I'm going to learn something in that area that I'm searching.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Um, and so then, of course, there's the reward. You've got the cue, we got the craving, we got the response, and now the reward. So now I've got the book. I've I've made it easy for me to grab that book and read. So what's the reward in this whole loop that we've been talking about?
Well, the reward will vary from person to person. And it's very much dependent on what you're hoping to get out of the whole endeavor. But what we should seek to do if we're trying to build this new habit, our goal should be to make the reward as satisfying as possible. So looking at your desired habit through the lens of wanting to become a more avid reader, what would be a satisfying reward from your perspective?
Well, I think the if I was reading a book that was going to help me improve in an area of my life, whether it's personally or professionally, I think learning that new skill to navigate through what I'm working on would be a reward. I think that would be very satisfying for me to be able to accomplish something that I was unable to before, that I didn't know how to do before, something that was frustrating me before because I
Yeah.
didn't necessarily have the skill set to accomplish it. So I think that would be definitely a satisfying reward for me.
No, absolutely. And we just kind of rinse and repeat. So for any habit that we're trying to create, we leverage the habit loop. We want to make our cue as obvious as possible. We want to make the craving as attractive as possible. We want our response to be as easy as possible, and we want our reward to be as satisfying as possible. So we make our cue obvious, we make our craving attractive, we make our response easy, and we make our reward satisfying. So if we were to sit down and look at our habit inventory or our list of resolutions, we should be able to look at each one of those activities and try to break it down into these four parts of the habit loop and figure out ways that we can um, stack the deck in our favor to be successful.
That makes perfect sense. And since we're talking about reading in this habit loop, I just want to throw out there to our audience, you get a book to read. Let's say the book is 300 pages. You don't have to sit down and read that book in one sitting. If you're an avid reader or quick reader, maybe you will do that. But the key here is if you're going to start this new activity, which is to read more, maybe you start with a few pages or a chapter versus trying to read the entire book in one sitting. I think that can sometimes distract folks, or it can just tire you out because you're not used to that activity. And it could discourage you from reading more because you're trying to read this entire book in one sitting, and you really don't have to approach it that way. In fact, I think if you're just reading a page or two at a time to get started, so that you build that habit, build that repetition, because that's one of the things that we've talked about, Frankie, is
Hmm.
a habit is something that you do repeatedly and then it becomes automatic. So starting slow with a page or two at a time, if you're not used to reading much, could be very instrumental in helping you to become that avid reader because you're reading consistently a couple of pages every day. Then, that couple of pages can turn into, 4 pages or 8 pages or 10 pages at a time. And before you know it, you're the avid reader that you really wanted to become.
Yeah, 100%. And that really leans into the whole notion of making the response easy. You know, starting the response off to be, all right, yeah, I'm going to read 3 or 4 pages, or I'm going to read just a chapter, making that response easy and not trying to, eat the whole cow in one sitting, for lack of a better term, making it easier for ourselves. And what's really cool is once we understand these four parts of the habit loop, we just walked through how we could leverage these for creating a new habit. We can use these same 4 steps of the habit loop to break an existing habit. So if we've done our habit inventory and we've identified something that's a habit we have that is working against us, we can, in a very similar fashion, leverage the habit loop to make it easier for us to break that particular habit. So I think it's important for us to walk through that example really quickly too.
So, as an example, I like to snack, and I usually snack if I'm watching television. And so when I'm watching my Lions play, I'm snacking,
Okay.
right? Snacking through the game. And if my goal is to reduce my amount of snacking, then clearly I have to reduce the amount of time that I'm watching television. But I can guarantee you, for me, that's only during the off season.
Understood. Understood.
Because as I mentioned, it's been over a half century that I've been waiting on these boys to make it to the Super Bowl. So I keep coming back year after year after year. And so I make light of that only because I know that there are things that our audience may face in the same kind of manner, right? You need to reduce something, whether it's television, whether it's scrolling on your phone or what have you. I used to have a TV in my bedroom. I used to have the TV on when I went to bed,
Mhm.
and I wake up sometimes and turn the TV off, or sometimes it would play on. And I got to a point where I wasn't getting the rest that I wanted to get, and so I took the TV out of my room. So I don't have a TV in my bedroom now, which has significantly improved not only my quality of sleep but my quantity. Right? My quantity and my quality of sleep have gone up because I don't sleep with it. I don't have TV, so it's not easy for
Mhm.
me to watch TV. And I get a little criticism about that from some friends and family, but I tell you what, it has really helped me tremendously.
Yeah. And when you think about it, if we're trying to break an existing habit, we just want to take the opposite approach when dealing with the 4 steps of the habit loop that we did when we were trying to create a new habit. So for the cue, when we were trying to create a new habit, We wanted to make it obvious. We wanted to make it as
Hmm.
visible as possible. Well, if we're trying to break an existing habit, the first thing we have to do is, pause for a moment and identify what is the cue, what is the trigger for me that sets this habit loop in progress. And once you've identified the cue, you want to try to make it as invisible as possible. So if, seeing the bag of chips on the table when you sit down to watch the Lions play was your cue, well, maybe you just don't put the chips somewhere where they're as easily accessible or as easily visible. Or if that's not the case, you choose different snacks, so that snacks that you have to cook and prepare, like some wings or things like that require a little more effort. They're not readily visible or ready for you to consume. So you try to make the cue as invisible as possible, because if you don't see the cue, then the loop doesn't start.
That makes sense, because when the Lions are on, when I'm engaged in that game, I'm not cooking. I am engaged in that game, so that makes a lot of sense. Choosing different snacks, or making it a little more difficult to have a snack in front of me during the game.
Yeah. And once we've identified that cue, again, we move on to the craving. So when we're trying to create a new habit, we want that craving to be as attractive as possible. When we're trying to break an existing habit, we want that craving to be unattractive. So in the case of your snacking, again, choosing different snack foods that require more effort and more work for you to be able to enjoy them would be one way to make that craving less attractive.
Yeah, that's something I'll have to spend some time with in the off season and figure out for next year.
Well, you're going to have plenty of off season because it is the Lions we're talking about.
I'm telling you, it is going to be plenty. And the funny thing is when we talk about, when we're using this example of snacking, I mean, there are other things that I like that are probably better for me. But I think that, as you said, the easy thing is to grab a bag of chips versus to prepare something that might be a little healthier, or something that I might eat less of. But making it a little more difficult is something that I think we don't really consider
Hmm.
with any of the habits, because we live in a society where we want to make things easy.
Right, right. And that takes us directly into the response, So for the response, the actual actions that we take, if we're trying to break an existing habit, rather than make it easy, we want to make it as difficult as possible. So for me, I'll flash back to college days. One of my biggest bad habits was I like to play video games a lot. I had a video game console in my dorm room. So I would get, done with classes, and I'd get in there and get to playing video games. And, that's not what I was there for. I need to be doing that work, but I was putting in work on, NBA Jam and all those old games from back in the day. So what I had to do is I had to make it more difficult for me to play video games. So what I would do is every time I would play, I would still play, but I would disconnect the console and put it in a box and tuck it away after every gaming session. So it required more effort for me to play. I would have to get the box out. I would have to hook the console back up, get everything set up just so I could play. So I introduced more difficulty to de-incentivize the action of playing video games.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think I'm going to need to get some help to turn around my snacking during the game, or the types of snacks, because it's just, when I think about how engaged I am in that game, the easy route is just going to be the route that I probably gravitate toward, and so I'll have to have a very conscious effort, make a conscious decision to do something different. Like, for instance, maybe I don't even purchase the chips before,
Right?
so they're not even in the house.
Yeah.
Maybe I purchase carrot sticks, not the same, but
Carrot sticks and celery. Yeah, that's the perfect
you
football
know
snack.
but if I want to harness this habit of snack reduction or better snacks, then I have to make better choices along that line. So I have to get myself set up for that. Not a little while to get there, but
Yeah.
I got to do something different.
Absolutely. And it's, you could even take the approach of, all right, well, I'll fix a plate of snacks before the game and I'll have just that plate there with me. And I can't go back into the kitchen except, at the end of a quarter. That's when I can go back into the kitchen and put more on my plate. You don't have the whole bag of chips in there with you for the duration of the game type of thing. So that may be another way that you make it more difficult, because if you're like me and I'm sitting down with a bag of chips, before the end of the day, I'll have my whole face in that bag of chips, trying to get every, last little bit of Dorito dust out of the bottom of that bag.
Right, I hear you. All right, well, we had a little fun here at the end, Franky. Let's give them a quick recap of the loop. Let's give the audience a quick recap of the loop.
Sure. So habits are formed through repetition, and once habits kick off, they follow the structure of a habit loop, which is divided into 4 parts: the cue, the craving, the response, and the reward. The cue is the trigger or the stimulus. The craving is the desire or the motivation. The response is the action that we take, and the reward is the outcome, the end goal of what we get. And if we can understand the 4 parts of a habit loop, we can leverage that to shape the creation of new habits and to shape the removal of existing habits. So if we want to start a new habit, we want to make the cue as obvious as possible. We want the craving to be as attractive as possible. The response should be easy and the reward should be satisfying. If we want to break an existing habit, we want the cue to be invisible. We want the craving to be unattractive. We want the response to be difficult. And we want to make the reward unsatisfying. So being able to manipulate your habits really boils down to understanding these 4 parts of the habit loop. And once we can understand these 4 parts of the habit loop, it really unlocks the door for us to make some significant change in our behaviors.
Awesome stuff. Well, I don't know about you, Franky. I don't know about the audience, but I've learned a few things about myself through this journey talking about habits. And I sure hope that it's been beneficial for you, the audience, as well. And it helps you to achieve your 2026 resolution goals, but also just to understand the inventory of your actual habits and what habits you may want to improve upon and what habits you may want to cut out of your life. So, like I said, I've learned a lot. As we mentioned before, Franky and I are not therapists in this space. We're not professionals in any way relating to some of the things that we talk about, except for the fact that we have experienced, we talk about our experiences. So I just want to put that out there. I want to encourage our audience, our audience, to consider your own habits, consider what you can do to improve areas of your life, whether it's reading or any other avenue to help you learn about yourself or about your current situation. But we invite you to put some work in and understand your own habits and how that is affecting you in your life and where you may want to be and where you may not want to be. We had a really good conversation, Franky. If you don't mind, sir, would you tell the audience where they can find us?
Yes, sir. So for all things PSI, you should go to our website. This is psipod.com. There you can find a list of all our episodes, all our social media links. You can find us on just about every podcast platform that's out there: Amazon, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Go out there and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. You can also find us on YouTube by searching for the PSI Effect Podcast or using our handle at This is PSI Pod. And that is also our handle for social media at This is PSI Pod. Reach out to us over social media. Let us know what habits you've identified, what habits you want to change, what new habits you want to start, and how you're thinking about breaking those down. And if you want to start a habit of being a new reader or more reading, like Eugene mentioned, you may want to start with The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg and Atomic Habits by James Clear. Both are really great books and shed a lot of light on ways that we can positively influence our behavior.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. So again, we really appreciate you being here with us. As Franky invited you, please leave some comments for us. We enjoy getting those comments and we do read them. But until next time, I want you to remember that setbacks are temporary. Comebacks are indeed legendary. And until next time, be brave and rise on purpose.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the PSI Effect Podcast. This show doesn't happen without you, and you can connect with us via Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. Visit our website at thisispsipod.com and find us on YouTube and social media at This Is PSI Pod. That's at This Is PSI Pod. Until next time, remember, be brave and rise on purpose.